I discovered the terrifying secrets behind history's most disturbing disasters. I never should have opened that door. The moment I did, a wave of dread washed over me. It felt wrong, unnatural. I was just digging through my late grandfather's attic, hoping to find something of value, a glimpse into the past. Instead, I unearthed a world shrouded in horror. The smell of must and decay filled the air. The shadows danced like whispers around me, inviting dread. My hands trembled as I pushed aside the cobwebs, the darkness clinging to me. I thought I heard something, a faint, almost sinister sound. My heart raced. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just the building settling, but then, the whisper returned, louder this time. A creak from the floorboard sent chills up my spine. I squinted into the gloom. What was lurking in there? An ancient secret? Or something worse? The stories my grandfather told me echoed in my mind: clandestine meetings in the dead of night, unexplained disappearances, tragedies buried under layers of time. Suddenly, an object caught my eye: a dusty old journal. My breath hitched. I reached for it, pulling it from the shadows like a precious treasure. The pages crinkled under my fingers, each word a glimpse into something unseen. My grandfather had written about disasters that twisted reality, flames that consumed entire towns on a windless night, a ship lost to a storm that appeared from nowhere. Curious and terrified, I leafed through the pages. Each entry seemed to bleed anguish. And then, I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin crawled. I was no longer alone. The air grew thick, suffocating. I dropped the journal, a sickening thud echoed in the silence, and the shadows shifted. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to the door, but it slammed shut, a heavy thud that reverberated through me. Panic surged. I was trapped with the secrets. The echoes of past tragedies rattled my bones. I could hear faint cries, terrified, pleading resounding from the corners of the attic. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in darkness, too afraid to move. Something shifted behind me, a figure. An outline that slowly took shape. And just as I was about to scream, there was only silence. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of the unseen pressing upon me. I could feel it close, too close. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The air had thickened, each breath a struggle against the invisible weight that seemed to press from all directions. I forced myself to turn slowly, trembling inside but refusing to let the terror seize me wholly. The darkness was profound, swallowing the edges of reality, erasing familiar shapes and boundaries. As my gaze settled into the void, I saw a silhouette in the shadows, its outline flickering like an outdated film reel. My pulse quickened. It was tall, birthing a sense of dread that attributed an eerie gravity to the air itself. Whatever it was not merely a figment of my imagination. It loomed, tethered to the very center of the attic, and with each moment the air grew colder, the temperature dropping like ice seeping through my bones. The faint cries returned, undulating in their urgency, pleading, weeping, echoing from layers of sorrow I couldn't fathom. It wasn't just the weight of what had transpired in the attic. These were voices, converging into a cacophony that poured from unseen corners, voices that begged for release, for remembrance, for peace. Tears pooled in my eyes as I felt their sorrow wrap around me like a shroud. I could almost hear their lingering stories clawing at the edges of consciousness, desperate to be told. Then, without warning, a gust of wind swept through the attic, extinguishing the tiny slivers of light the waning daylight had offered. The corners of the room became deeper, enveloped in a cloak of ink-black shadow. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting my lip to suppress the scream that wanted to burst forth. It felt like time itself had paused, and yet the world around me creaked with ancient resonance. With a sudden flash, the silhouette moved an unnatural grace that sent waves of horror reverberating through me. It advanced toward a battered armchair in the corner, the upholstery tattered and stained like the remnants of lives once lived. There, under the dim expanse of shadow, I thought I saw something twitch beneath the chair's fabric. I squinted harder, my heart slicing through my chest. The moment stretched endlessly as I inched forward, compelled by a paralyzing curiosity despite every instinct screaming for me to flee. What if the journal held answers or more horrors? As I reached for it, the shadow wavered, and for a brief heartbeat, a pair of shimmering eyes flashed at me, pale, empty voids that pulsed with an otherworldly light. I fell back against the wall, heart racing, and felt the vibrations of ghostly laughter tickling the edges of my sanity. The journal, now a few inches closer to the armchair, beckoned to me with insidious whispers. I had to know. I had to understand what bound me to this cursed place. Extending my hand, fingers brushed against the paper's surface. The moment I touched it, a cold shock pulsed through me, a wave of memories that were not my own. Flames danced in vivid sequences, engulfing buildings bathed in despair, the silhouettes of terrified faces flooding my mind. I gasped, stumbling backward, but the visions thrust deeper as if I had pierced a veil no human should unravel, and then the whispers morphed, forming coherent words, each syllable twisted, wrought from anguish. Help us, set us free. The voices melded into one relentless scream that pierced through the cacophony of nightmares. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath my feet cracked ominously, the very foundations beginning to shake as if the house itself revolted against the past that clung to it. I managed to tear my gaze from the journal, but not before I glimpsed the armchair shift slightly, revealing a figure crawling out from beneath it. I froze, fear paralyzing my limbs. Instantly, icy tendrils gripped my throat as I caught the shimmer of its grotesque form, pale and disfigured, reaching for me with elongated fingers that seemed to stretch across eternity. It was closer now, impossibly so, and just when I thought the abyss had reached its limit, it opened its mouth, not to scream, but to reveal a gaping maw of darkness that threatened to consume every whisper, every scream. In that moment, as the shadows swirled and the cries of the past crescendoed into terrifying clarity, I realized with sheer horror that the only thing worse than uncovering the truth was becoming part of it. The scream tore from my lips but was swallowed by the yawning void, dissipating into the thick air of the attic as the monstrous figure approached. It moved with a sickening grace, each contorted limb dragging it closer to me, grotesque features twisting into a cruel semblance of a smile that was devoid of warmth. The essence of despair clung to it, weaving into the very fabric of the space, as if the walls themselves could feel the dread it propagated. I pressed against the wall, my body trembling as the memories continued to flood my mind. Fire, chaos, destruction. Each scene unfurled with desperate clarity, the cries more distinct as they passed through my consciousness like a river of anguish. Faces appeared in my mind, a mother frantically looking for her child, a man clawing for safety as the flames closed in, the lonesome figure of a girl who danced joyfully only to be swallowed by shadows. They were all trapped, suspended in time, and now they were demanding to join me in their purgatorial hell. The figure was close now, its breath a frigid whisper caressing my face, sending chills cascading down my spine. I could see its skin, ghostly and translucent, with veins like shadows pulsating violently beneath the surface, each thump echoing the desperate heartbeat of the house. Join us, it rasped, voice like shards of glass grinding together, we are all victims here. I wanted to run, to escape the horror that threatened to envelop me, but my feet refused to budge. The ground seemed to pulse beneath me with an energy so ancient and powerful it grounded me in place. I fought against the paralysis, but the floor groaned in protest, as if resonating with the creature's continued approach. In a final push of courage, I tore my gaze from its haunting visage to the journal that lay only a few inches away, illuminated momentarily by a flicker of moonlight that broke through the heavy clouds outside. I lunged for it once more, and as my fingers brushed its surface, a surge of energy coursed through me. The walls throbbed in rhythm with an echoing heartbeat, the air crackling with tension as the room began to rotate, warping into a living organism that winced under the weight of its history. The shadows grew teeth and claws, threatening to consume everything in their path. The wailing voices crescendoed, merged into a violent tempest. Release us. End this, and I felt the urgency wrapping around my throat, the pressure becoming unbearable. The attic had transformed from a mere space into an entity wielding immense and malignant power. I stumbled, landing hard against the floor, and the journal slipped from my fingers, lying just out of reach in a pool of darkness. I knew I had to reclaim it. It held the only key to understanding the tragedy that bound me to this cursed place. But as I reached for it again, the armchair shuddered violently. The grotesque figure was upon me, its clawed hand landing against my wrist like iron, locking me in place. In that fleeting moment, I glimpsed something fluttering beneath the chair, the tattered remnants of another journal, one that could not have belonged to me. I reached for it instinctively, but my fingers grazed nothing but the cold, dusty floor. Help us, the truth lies within, whispered a chorus of faded voices, sharper now, swallowing me whole in luminous despair. Suddenly, without warning, the shadows erupted, coiling up in fury, lifting the spirit toward the ceiling, its wails mingling with the infernal echoes of the house like a new symphony of agony as old as time itself. The air thickened into a suffocating fog, swallowing the outlines of everything I had just seen, and then, with a final sickening crash, the floor beneath me cracked open, revealing a gaping abyss, a yawning mouth that pulsed with insatiable hunger, pulling me towards its insidious depths. As the void loomed larger, the chilling idea rippled through my mind: the horrors were not merely anchored to the past, they had set their sights on a new victim. Just as the darkness claimed my senses, a piercing voice rang out from the depths of the shadows: you shouldn't have come here. We're already part of you with that. I felt the world slip away, my scream merging with the cacophony of despair as I fell into the waiting abyss, suspended between history and a terrifying unknown, forever linked to the horrors I sought to uncover. I plunged into the depths of a darkness that felt sentient, a void that twisted and squirmed around me, dragging me deeper into its cold embrace. The weight of despair pressed on my chest, an inescapable shroud that clamored for my breath. I felt invisible fingers pulling at my hair, scratching down my arms, tightening around my throat like an unwanted necklace of dread. As I spiraled downward, the echoes of history wrapped tightly around me, the cries of the lost morphed into a haunting symphony, each note a ghostly lament marking the tragedies of their past. Images flickered in the oppressive dark, charred remains of a once vibrant town, children playing in a sunlit field now engulfed in shadow, laughter replaced by the sharp crack of splintering wood and the moans of the dying. My mind raced as I faced the inevitability of joining their ranks, their despair now entwined with my own. Suddenly, the descent halted as if I had collided with a wall of memories, a barrier made up of anguish and regret. I found myself standing in an eerie chamber, illuminated by flickering candlelight. Shadows danced against the walls, revealing grotesque shapes, almost human but twisted beyond recognition, absorbed in an eternal waltz of grief. The air was thick with the stench of decay and old secrets, and the rhythm of my heart quickened as I recognized this place. Before me lay a marble altar, slick with blackened stains that curled into the design of anguished faces, distorted in eternal agony. An ancient book rested atop it, bound in cracked leather and adorned with runes that pulsed with a baleful light. It beckoned to me. I could feel its power coursing through my veins, like electricity sparking against my skin. The stories within its pages called to the deepest corners of my soul, whispering the truths that had trapped so many others. As I reached for the tome, the shadows shifted, coiling around my limbs, their grips tightening. They were the incarnations of all the desperation and rage that had once filled this space. You are not worthy. A voice boomed, deep and resonant, making the very ground quake beneath me. I seek to understand. I pleaded, gasping for air as the shadows pulled me closer to the altar's edge. I need to know. Knowledge has a price, mortal, the voice hissed, dark and seductive. Are you willing to pay it? With every ounce of strength, I wrenched my hand away and stumbled backward, the shadows screeching in frustration and pain. I spun around, desperate for an exit, but the chamber had transformed, becoming a labyrinth of endless walls, each one vibrating with the sorrow of the countless souls absorbed into its depths. I was trapped, ensnared in a puzzle that threatened to consume me entirely, but then, a flicker of light caught my eye, a faint glow seeping from a crack in one wall. Instinctively, I raced towards it, driven by an unseen force that whispered promises of escape. With every step, I could hear the distant echoes of pleading voices rising behind me, an ominous chorus warning me to turn back. "Don't leave us. We need you, the truth can be yours," they cried, their words melding into a horrifying cacophony that reverberated through the chamber, drowning out my own thoughts. I hesitated, the images of the wretched and lost clawing at the edges of my sanity as I pressed on toward the light. A surge of determination propelled me forward, almost as if my body knew that this slender beam of hope could hold the key to my freedom or my doom. As I neared the crack, the space around me twisted violently, the shadows reeling back as if warning me of the consequence of my actions. "No," they wailed, their voices rising to a crescendo, desperate and furious as I reached out for the luminous escape. "You will suffer for this." A cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the flickering candlelight and wrapping around me like a shroud. The light winked out, and suddenly, it was just me and the all-consuming dark. Heart racing, I pressed my palm against the crack, feeling the warmth of something alive pulsing on the other side, my breath shaky with trepidation. Then, without warning, the chamber shook, and the floor cracked open once more, unveiling another gaping maw, wider and more dreadful than the first. Everything around me trembled as the shadows raged, their screams echoing through the abyss. I felt the finality of the moment pressing down on me like a boulder. I could either succumb to the darkness or leap into the unknown light, but before I could decide, the shadows lunged at me, twisting into a monstrous shape, their voices merging into one chilling declaration: "The truth cannot be escaped, it must be embraced. You are ours." In that harrowing instant, I became acutely aware of an awakening terror deep within myself, as if I had inadvertently unlocked something dormant. The walls screamed in protest as I was pulled further toward the void, my scream lost amidst their cacophonous triumph, and a horrifying realization took root. Perhaps the real horror lay not in the confines of this place, but in the very essence of who I had become. My fate wrestled between the light and the shadows, suspended in a timeless battle, until with a deafening roar, the abyss surged forth threatening to swallow my very soul whole. The roar of the abyss swallowed my consciousness, dragging me into a swirling tempest of memories that spiraled like a vortex. I felt as though I were floating, suspended in a void thick with the essence of despair, a cloying miasma that clung to my skin and haunted my thoughts. Visions rushed past me, a frenzied tableau of suffering and loss, grotesque tableaus of humanity as if life were nothing more than fuel for some ancient engine of agony. Suddenly, the tumult quieted, and I found myself standing in a dilapidated room, the air heavy with the lingering echoes of sorrow. The walls, stained with age and neglect, whispered forgotten names as if they too were trapped in this cycle of grief. Faint images flickered before me like ephemeral ghosts on a projector, each one a fragment of a life cut short: a mother cradling her child beneath a crumbling ceiling, lovers frozen in a moment of terror as the world around them fell to ruin. Heart pounding, I moved further into the space, feeling the palpable weight of eyes upon me, unseen but undeniably there. Shadows curled in the corners, writhing with an insatiable hunger that sent chills racing down my spine. As my pulse quickened, I edged toward the center of the room, where an old mirror stood, its surface cracked and clouded by time. A faint gleam caught my eye, as if the glass held more than mere reflections. I approached cautiously, drawn in by an unfathomable compulsion, the shadows retreating in fear and anticipation. As I leaned closer, the surface shimmered, revealing not my own reflection, but the anguished faces of those who had once occupied this forsaken place. Their mouths moved, though their whispers echoed only within my mind: "You will suffer as we have. The truth will consume you." A deafening crash erupted behind me, the walls convulsing as another entity sought to join this nightmarish interlude. The mirror shimmered violently, as if caught in a battle of wills between the sorrowful spirits and this new threat. In the chaos, I saw her, a woman with ashen features, her eyes swirling with a tempest of madness and grief. She was beautiful yet terrifying, an embodiment of all that had been sacrificed here. "Join us," she screamed, her voice a cacophony of sin and longing. "Embrace the pain. You cannot escape the truth, it is your birthright. The mirror writhed, offering glimpses of my own potential doom, futures filled with the same burdens of loss, torment, and visceral horror that had decimated those who had come before. Images of my loved ones, twisted in despair and terror, tore through me like daggers, waking buried fears I thought I had conquered. In their faces, I recognized the desperation I had so frequently ignored, their pleas echoing for someone to take heed of the shadows lying just beneath the surface. With every second, the air thickened, palpable dread weaving itself into my mind, suffocating me. I stumbled back from the mirror, only to realize too late that I had left myself open. All around me, the shadows shifted and coiled eagerly, waiting to claim me. The walls whispered in triumph, knowing I was weakening. I felt them latch on, cold tendrils seeping into my skin, anchoring me to this fate. Liar! You think you can leave? The woman screamed, her figure distorting, becoming as much a part of the structure as the decaying wood itself. You are bound to us, bound to the truth. Truth is the only escape. As I fought against the increasing tide of desolation, I was suddenly pulled forward, the mirror now a gateway threatening to drag me through into that infernal realm. I clawed at my surroundings, until something within meth essence they sought to break flared up in rebellion, igniting a violent storm of memories and emotions. In a moment of clarity, I understood, the truth was not merely a curse woven into this wretched tapestry but a varying spectrum, a choice that lay dormant within me, waiting to be unleashed. The walls trembled in recognition, echoing the whispers of my bloodline, the lineage of those who had triumphed over suffering, driven by defiance. I turned back to the mirror, my breath hitching at the ethereal faces that begged for deliverance and acknowledgement. Light engulfed me as I screamed, "No! I will not be bound. I am more than your chains." With a final cry that resonated with unrealized power, I thrust my hand forward, reaching into the mirror's depths. The very structure of reality pulsed with raw energy, and at that moment, with a spine-chilling crack, the mirror shattered completely, splintering into countless shards that flew toward me. Each shard offered fleeting visions of nightmares yet to come, a world engulfed in shadow, civilizations collapsing, laughter transforming into screams, and amidst this chaos, a horrifying voice echoed above the rest, chilling my veins to ice: the truth demands a choice. Embrace it or face annihilation. You will never escape us. Just before the shards rained down upon me, the air fractured like glass, revealing a dark vortex spiraling into the unknown, and I was dragged toward it, the shadows screaming in joy and rage. The weight of their triumph bore down on me, and before I could even form a coherent thought of resistance, I was flung into the swirling darkness, devoid of light, sound, or sanity, and as the void consumed me, it whispered with familiarity, "Welcome home." The descent into darkness was both swift and torturous, twisting my senses around like a marionette strung tightly by invisible strings. I plummeted headfirst into an abyss that felt both welcoming and abominable, each moment spent within it unraveling my humanity. Whispers ebbed and flowed in my ears, an uncontainable cacophony that insisted on joining my consciousness with unearthly horrors. It was as if time itself had shattered, and I spiraled through fragments of reality, ruptured and grotesque. Finally, the void released me with a violent lurch, and I landed on solid ground that felt oddly warm, pulsating beneath my weight like a living creature. I gasped, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and the sickly sweet scent of decay flooded my nostrils. As I opened my eyes, I was greeted not by the familiar decorum of the world I had known, but instead, a nightmare rendered in vivid hues of crimson and black. Around me stretched a wasteland, filled with twisted remains of structures that looked as if they had once been grand but had fallen prey to time and torment. They rose like gnarled sentinels bent on holding untold secrets within their splintered walls. Shadows danced along the jagged edges, indistinguishable from the remnants of bone and stone, whispering promises of despair and revelation. My skin crawled with a primal fear, the knowledge grappling with me that I was not alone. That I stumbled through this barren terrain, each step marked by an echo of despair, when sudden movement caught my eye, a flickering shape darting among the ruins. It was followed by distant wailing, a sound that shivered through the remnants of my soul, evoking resentments of loss and longing I had barely brushed against. I followed it, my hesitation fueled by fear as much as an insatiable curiosity. As I approached the jagged maw of a crumbling Buldinga cathedral of horror bathed in crimson light, the wails grew more distinct, now resonating with a sorrowful lament echoing the cries of the forgotten. Peering through the splintered archway, I caught sight of a figure, draped in tattered cloth, swaying like a marionette deprived of its strings. Its back was turned to me, and though I could not make out its features from this distance, an overwhelming wave of anguish surged forth, trying to reach me from the depths of despair. "Please," it moaned, a heart-wrenching mixture of pain and hope, "don't let them take me too." I hesitated, torn between the dread of approaching and the magnetic pull of its beckoning plea. The shadows stretched and pulled, whispering secrets of torment that seeped into my skin. Focusing, I realized that the figure's words weren't meant for me alone. They were reminders of my deepest fears. In an instant, the figure turned. A face splintered with grief and despair bore down on Metwo, haunting, vacant eyes hovered in hollows of anguish. The visage twisted and shifted, a kaleidoscope of faces from the previous realm. I'd just escaped the faces of those I had once known, now trapped in an eternal loop of suffering and loss. "What have you done?" it screamed, the harmony of voices rising together to form a monstrous showdown of sentences. "You shattered it. You awakened them." With every syllable, the ground rumbled beneath me, shaking the very air I breathed. The shadows leaped forward, their energy nipping at my heels, writhing like snakes ready to consume me whole. The voices crescendoed into an angry chorus, spilling forth an overarching darkness that swallowed the crimson light whole. They were no longer whispers, now, they were 1,000 anguished screams reverberating, threatening to burst from the confinement of their eternal torment. "Join us, embrace your fate." They shrieked, hands reaching from the shadows, clawing at my sanity. The figure, merging into the throng, screamed anew, "Fate is not a choice, it is a bind. You must escape." Before suddenly, the ground split open beneath me, a gaping fissure erupting with luminous darkness, mirroring the chaotic storm of emotions that raged inside me. Gravity shifted, sending me tumbling into the abyss. Once more, and as I fell, the goddess of despair beckoned from below, a silhouette engulfed in the very shadows that bound me. "Surely you see, my child," she whispered, her voice curling around me, reverberating with a sinister allure. "There are no paths to escape, only paths to discover your true nature." With that, I was expelled from the dark fissure, flung into a realm untouched by light, a void where the essence of every sacrificed soul simmered at the edges. And in that moment of submersion, lost once again to the vast expanse of agony, the darkness beckoned, drawing upon my heart and soul to choose once more, a choice akin to death, yet more profound, more terrifying. Hovering between the echoes of the damned, I gasped for air, the fangs of despair sinking ever deeper. I braced myself, knowing that to survive this torment, I had to confront those twisted remnants of my past. They were no longer just phantoms, but ghastly truths that could reshape my very essence. And as I turned to call out to the darkness, my voice was swallowed in a guttural howl, louder and more sinister than I'd ever thought possible, echoing the very fate that awaited me should I falter. "You cannot escape what you have awakened." Just before I succumbed to the consuming void, a single, chilling message rattled through my bones and settled deep in my soul: "You will not be the last." The whispers continued to close in, enveloping me in their sinister embrace, and I felt the pull of unseen forces, the jagged edges of despair threatening to tear me apart. I floated in this chasm, suspending myself in the murky depths of pain and sorrow, desperate to find solid ground or any semblance of reason. The darkness clamored with last-ditch memories from a life once lived, each fragment pulling me into deeper confusion. I could not decipher if this realm mocked me or teased my impending doom. Dim shadows flitted around incongruously, dawn-like spirals that gravitated toward something I could not identify. They whispered, beckoned, and slaked a terrifying curiosity that gnawed at my sanity. I spun slowly, my limbs slack and unsure, attempting to grasp what loomed deeper in the abyss. Raw fear gripped my chest, the realization that even the depths of despair felt far closer to me than the succor of light. Suddenly, I was thrust from the void, anchored by an unseen force that propelled me through a frigid space. I was tearing through worlds, my essence stretched thin as I blinked against a blinding burst of brightness. It could have been a celestial sun illuminating the darkness, but as I emerged, my eyes widened with horror. I found myself plunged into a funeral pyre, the acrid scent of scorching flesh and smoldering wood wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. The scene was grotesque, an inferno of anguished faces embellished in burning ash, reaching towards something beyond comprehension. I stood frozen, the crackling of flames stretching the fabric of reality around me. Each scream punctuated the air, a tormented symphony resonating with the rhythm of my heart. Embrace your truth. The horrid remnant of the figure from before, now twisted and burned beyond recognition, loomed among the flickering flames. Its eyes, still filled with that same depth of sorrow, stretched wide, almost pleading, a morbid play of agony. You shape these horrors, you must choose. I stumbled backward, into the depths of the smoldering despair. The screams feel like they were clawing at my soul. I glanced around, witnessing macabre scenes unfold, men and women contorted in burning embrace, their bodies melting into eternal suffering, shadows feasting upon their despair. Please, don't let them take me too, became the chilling refrain coursing through the air as I stood frozen amidst the carnage. I realized, with a dawning dread, that these weren't just echoes of the past but premonitions of what awaited if I were to fail, if I were to succumb to the dark. Suddenly, the ground beneath me cracked again, lines of fire bursting forth like veins filled with poison. I was thrust down once more, spiraling through tunnels of deeper fire and despair. Deadly shadows clawed at me, brushing against my skin as they roared with laughter, promises of power veiling their intentions. Your choices bind you to this fate. They jeered in one voice before it splintered into thousands, each eager to devour the last remnants of my sanity. Panic clawed within me, a tempest of choices racing across the battlefield of my mind, each one laden with consequence. If I dared falter, it would mean the death not just of body but of self. Just as I thought the flames would consume me, I emerged from the bottom of the raging inferno, hurtling into a desolate landscape surreal in its grotesque beauty. Towering trees twisted into contorted figures, their branches reaching like skeletal arms, beckoning from the shadows of reality. The color of the sky had twisted into a deep, sickly purple, pulsating as if the world itself were a vast, dying heart. In that moment, something primal within me shifted, feeble but magnificent. It whispered of hope against the odds. I caught sight of a shimmering streak among the lifeless forms around me. It flickered like a dying ember, gnawing at the chords of my gut, filled with a desperate promise of escape. I turned to follow it, but as my feet rushed forward, the ground shuddered violently. Tremors rippled outwards, splitting the earth in my wake, as legs of shadow shot up, clawing and grasping, reaching for me, the echoes of countless souls promising that if I gave in, I would know not through death but through the ritual of suffering. No. I screamed, my voice swallowed by the thunderous cacophony of memories, the cries of the damned melding together into a sinister mantra. The flame curled before me, igniting a path toward the twinkling light. I lunged forward, my every nerve alight with determination, but as my fingers reached out to grasp it, light flickered and faded. And in its place formed an eerie mirror, reflecting not just my visage but everything I had lost, highlighting grotesque versions of my most painful memories. With horror, I watched as a hand reached from the glass, cool as ice, wanting to draw me in, to consume me. The whispers erupted into shrieks echoing through the desolation as I struggled against the pull of the heavy, dark gravity. You are not alone, they shrieked in 1,000 voices as the darkness coiled around my insides, its desire to swallow me whole, desperate and insatiable. In that moment, the mirror shattered, fragments slashing into the air like falling stars, and within the shattering, I glimpsed a horrifying truth. The face that looked back was not just mine, but every soul I had awakened, lost, damned, and chained to this very moment, a legion of past hearts filled with torment and despair. As the shadows erupted from the broken glass, pulling me into the ever-deepening void, the last chilling words echoed within me, a cold whisper promising what would follow. You were never meant to leave, and now you shall join us. The jagged shards of the mirror twisted in the air like malicious talons, weaving a tapestry of despair that adorned the realm of my nightmares. I felt their coldness, the sharp edges of fate ready to plunge deep into my being. Fleeing the impending doom, I stumbled backward, desperate to escape the horrors unfurling around me, but the landscape shifted beneath my feet, the ground warping with malevolence as roots of shadow curled around the barren soil, anchoring me in place, their touch chillingly intimate. I turned my gaze upwards, where the sickly purple sky rippled like oil, forming grotesque faces locked in agony, echoes of the damned who had once walked among the living, now forever trapped in this purgatorial playground. The shadows began to close in, tighter and tighter, as though they possessed a will of their own, intent on dragging me into their clamoring depths. Heart pounding, I fought against the suffocating dread, casting wild glances for any semblance of light that would flicker across the abyss. I screamed not for rescue, but against the encroaching certainty of obliteration. Your essence has awakened them, a voice hissed, dripping malice as it coiled around my thoughts. It leached into my mind, igniting memories of those I had lost, a family bathed in light drowned by an unending darkness, a brother's laugh that echoed long before his shadow had vanished. I clutched my head, wanting to tear the words from my skull. Behind me, the ghostly resonance of laughter began to bubble through the shadows, cold and hollow. I turned, but the visage of my brother hung there, eyes hollow and dripping with despair, continuously fading in and out of existence. They crave more souls, he whispered, his voice a haunting melody warped by sorrow, and you are the key. You, his image disintegrated into a shower of shadows, the dark matter swooping in with zealous intent. Suddenly, all at once, they surged forward, a storm of anguished faces blending together, each mouth screaming, a cacophony ensnaring me in a web of terror. Then, as if orchestrated by the very fabric of the realm, the shadows retreated, leaving only a singular, twisted figure at the center, a grotesque amalgamation of burnt flesh and gnarled limbs that stood as a testament to humanity's darkest depravity. Its eyes glimmered with an insatiable hunger, glowing like embers in a desolate fireplace, and it whispered my name with an unnerving familiarity, an invocation that sent a jolt of ice down my spine. Become one of us, it hissed, slowly drawing closer. Just say the words, and you will be freed. I shook my head violently, trying to drown out the call that resonated like a funeral dirge. But my resolve began to shatter under the weight of my choices. The memories of love and laughter twisted grotesquely into images of suffering past, the flickering memories of every life that had once touched mine, now caged in anguish around me. They were not merely projections but echoes of my sins, held captive by the shadows' demanding grip. In the pit of my stomach, a whisper of fury ignited. Was I truly responsible for this obliteration? I fought against the consuming darkness that insisted it was my doing, that I was destined to bear the weight of all this agony. The figure before me drew closer still, its fetid breath sending waves of revulsion crashing through me. You cannot escape what you've unleashed. Join us, it crooned, and with each word, I could feel tendrils of despair wrapping tighter around the remnants of my spirit. Then, above the chaos, a sudden screech pierced the air, reverberating against the twisted branches of the trees. I looked up just in time to see a massive shape descending from the heavens, the silhouette of a raven, blacker than the deepest void, its wings stretching wide as if to herald an omen of doom. The creature flew straight toward me, and a surge of chaos erupted in its wake. The shadows recoiled, hissing angrily as the raven landed, its obsidian eyes locking onto mine. I could feel its weight pressing down on my soul, as ancient wisdom intertwined with a more sinister awareness. You are being hunted, it croaked, voice like stones scraping against each other, and if you do not act swiftly, you will become part of their torment. Before I could grasp the weight of its words, the ground trembled once again with a fierce intensity. The shadows screamed in unison, lunging toward me like a tide of blackness, intent on dragging me down into their suffocating depths. The raven flapped its wings, stirring a tempest around us, and with a sudden surge of impulse, I leapt to the side, narrowly escaping the shadow's grasp. But I wasn't alone. The raven held its ground, and as the shadows grew restless, shifting and curling like smoke, I felt an overwhelming desperation rise within me. Knew then that escape was not simply a choice but an act of life or death. Run. The raven cawed fiercely, an echo of a life once lost that now lingered between realms. And just as I turned to make my desperate flight, shadows erupted forth, encasing my feet like cold iron. As they dragged me down, clawing at my very being, the raven screeched one last time, its voice riding the wind. A blinding flash engulfed the space, illuminating the darkness for a flickering moment before the ground below me cracked open like a gaping mouth hungry for my despair. Just as the darkness swallowed me whole, I felt a hand reach out from the void, sharp as glass, and as it clutched my wrist, the world around me fractured, spinning into a kaleidoscope of anguish and terror, and just like that, I was pulled into the depths, no longer certain of who or what I was becoming. The shadows began to close in, an unending hunger, whispering promises of false redemption in my ears before everything went dark. I plummeted into a fathomless abyss, the darkness wrapping around me like the embrace of a long-lost Lavera lover who held nothing but despair. As the air whooshed past my face, each breath became harder to take, stolen by the suffocating weight of my own dread. When I finally landed, it was upon a ground as cold as the lifeless void, absorbing the remnants of my spirit. The shadows swirled around me, now more coherent than ever, morphing into shapes that seemed to echo twisted versions of the spirits I had known. I could feel their eyes, hungry, hollow, and unforgiving as they blinked back from the darkness. They whispered, their words weaving into my mind, each syllable a plaintive plea steeped in sorrow. "Help us, set us free, I know you," I gasped, heart racing as a flood of memories crushed in around me, pressing against my psyche like stones in a coffin. It was all too familiar. The faces of the lost, the mournful cries that had echoed in my childhood nightmares now came to life at my feet. It was an unsettling reunion with a chorus of the damned. They reached out, skeletal hands stretching toward me in desperation, their mouths moving in silent agony, but amid their agony stood something darker, a colossal form shadowed by the weight of their despair. It towered above, a grotesque statue of grief wrought from the very depths of loss and suffering. Its face was indecipherable, akin to a forgotten relic that had long since eroded away, yet its presence radiated a heavy malice, a void that consumed the flickering light of hope. "You think you've come to save them? You're as lost as they are," it rasped, its voice hauntingly echoing through the hollow silence. Each word dripped with disdain, an echo of profound betrayal that clawed at my heart. "Why are you doing this?" I stammered, my fear coiling tightly around my throat as the shadows surged to my sides, whispering vile secrets that churned my stomach. "What do you want from me? Your will, your spirit, it shall be the catalyst for their awakening," it hissed, venomous and terrible. "You are the thread that binds our fates. In you, we shall be reborn." That I felt a violent pull from deep within, a compulsion to become part of this dark narrative that twisted around me. Images of my brother, the echo of laughter now turned into screams of torment, flooded my mind. Was this the price of my guilt? The shadows seemed to relish my fear, feeding upon the regret that thickened the air. "Join us, and together we can rewrite history," the malevolence beckoned, reaching out with arms that dissolved into writhing tendrils. They curled around my form as if trying to coax my resistance into submission. Then, in a moment that felt simultaneously eternal and fleeting, I spotted a flicker of light at the edge of my awareness, a glimmer that broke through the weight of the shadows. It pulsated like a heartbeat, resonating through the darkness like a lifeline thrown to a drowning soul. But as I reached for it, the great figure loomed larger, shadowy fingers tightening around my throat like a vice, choking the hope from my lungs. "Your effort is futile," it bellowed, the echoes sending ripples through the encroaching darkness. "You are bound to us, our fate is intertwined. You wish to uncover the truths that history shrouded. Are you ready to join the ranks of those who multiplied their woe?" I writhed in agony, desperate to resist what was becoming an inescapable grasp. But I felt the tug of despair and guilt gnawing at my resolve. My choices, the sins of my searching heart laid bare before me. Was it the past that held me captive, or was it my own reflection in the darkness that sought vengeance? Just then, with an unexpected intensity, the raven's voice surged into my consciousness once more. "You have the power to break the cycle, but only if you choose not to embrace it." With that, the shadows around me shrieked, the final offerings of surrender clawing at the fabric of my mind. In that moment of clarity, I understood, the raven was not merely a harbinger of doom, but a flicker of the freedom I craved, a sliver of salvation in this labyrinth of torment. Then, the ground shook, and the earth beneath me crumbled away, leaving an endless chasm in its wake. I gasped as I finally tore my gaze from the chaos, locking eyes with the raven just in time to see its wings beat fiercely against the waves of darkness. It dove toward me, its obsidian feathers cutting through the air with purpose. "Choose." It screamed, and with its call, the shadows writhed in fury. Around me, shapes of the damned reached out, their screams blending into a symphony of despair that threatened to drown me whole. But I shouted, my breath racing. Before I could utter another word, the shadowy monstrosity lunged forward, intent on devouring the hope I clutched desperately. In that moment, I had a choice. I could grasp the light and seek deliverance, or succumb to the shadows and be engulfed by the torment of my past. But before I could decide, a blinding light pierced the cacophony, cutting through the darkness like an unsheathed sword. And everything exploded into chaos. A dazzling flash erupted from the chasm, engulfing us all as the shadows recoiled in horror. As I felt the world splinter around me and the darkness shrieked its last, a voice filled with anguish whispered in my ear, "Choose wisely or it will choose for you." The light swallowed me whole, and I was tossed beyond comprehension, teetering on the edge of salvation and utter ruin. For just as I realized where I was headed, a new horror erupted into the air. A cacophony of laughter, both familiar and foreign, echoed from the depths below. That I was falling once more, falling directly into the heart of my fear. I landed hard against the cold stone of what felt like a forgotten crypt, the darkness pressing in on every side, enclosing me like a cursed vice. My body ached, but more than the pain, it was the weight of the memory as me own and those of the long-gone souls tethered to this abyss that crushed against my consciousness, so overwhelming that I could hardly distinguish my thoughts from theirs. I curled into a ball, gasping for breath, the air thick with the scent of decay and despair. As I looked around, my eyes slowly adjusted to the deep shadows. Flickering candles burned dimly, casting twisted shadows on the walls that, like specters, flickered and danced in eternal torment. Haunting whispers filled the air, laced with anguish and pleading, "Help us, remember us." Their voices pulsed in rhythm with my own thudding heart. I knew they were trying to weave their emotions, their painful histories, into my very being. A ghoulish thread tightening around my core. I forced myself to rise, driven by a newfound resolve, my spirit fighting against the suffocating weight of the whispers as I walked deeper into the crypt. Each meter felt as if I was crossing into the shadow of a memory, ones I had witnessed, yet also those I had unknowingly borne. The warmth of my former life slipped through my fingers like elusive sand. The shadows curled tighter, breathing their despair into me, and I whispered back with resignation, "I understand your pain," and instinctively, the shadows quieted, their faces now forming in the darkness a haunting tapestry of my fears come to life. I recognized them, the mother searching for her child, the lovers caught in time, the innocent child with bright eyes that had turned hollow. They swam before me, their mouths moving silently, desperate pleas painted in their tortured expressions. Suddenly, at the heart of this gathering darkness, a figure emerged, a grotesque silhouette solidifying in the suffocating gloom. It was tall, hair as black as soot, and eyes shimmered like molten silver laced with agony. A voice boomed from its twisted mouth, "You have awakened us." Horror engulfed me as those words sent ripples of recognition through my veins. I staggered back, memories seeping into the forefront of my mind like poison. No, that can't be true. I didn't want this. I just wanted to know the truth. The figure tilted its head, a smile playing across its featureless visage. "You wished to uncover the secrets of history," it hissed, "only to find the painful truth was that you were part of it all along, the cursed lineage of those who fell before you." I felt cold sweat bead along my spine, understanding now that the legends surrounding this place were not ancient folklore, they were a living curse, etched into my very DNA, driving the relentless cycle of despair I tried to escape. Another realization struck me hard: the journal. The old leather tome, now forgotten in the echoes of this sacred hell, held the very rhythm that bound us all. No, I rasped, my voice strangely hollow. "I can't allow this." But deep inside, a flicker of doubt ignited: could I truly be free? I had discovered their pain, had allowed their memories to shape my own conscience. "We have no future. You're only feeding the darkness." A chorus of anguished cries erupted from the shadows, the faces merging into grotesque warping masses, each voice echoing the fragments of what once was. "You are part of our past." They howled, and I felt myself being pulled, a thousand tentacled grasp binding me to the cycles of horror I swore I would break. In an act of desperation, I turned around and ran toward the exposed stone wall, my heart racing with every echoing footfall. The screams sharpened, urging me to join them. I slammed my palms against the crumbling surface, feeling its coldness seeping into me, feeding off my fear. I had to shield myself from their rage. "Please, I want to be free," I screamed, the rawness of my voice raw against the shadow's howls, but as soon as I cried out, the light began to pulse sporadically. The shadows shuddered, and an unbearable weight pressed against my chest. Sick determination emanating from their cries. Suddenly, the shadows hesitated. A muted brightness flickered, a familiar pulse of light. My lashings of hope igniting. I remembered the raven's call from the depths of despair. "Fight it!" I shouted, dredging deep into my resolve. The ground trembled beneath my feet, yet I fought against the consuming shadows, yearning to survive, and then, from the void, the specter of my past reignited. The figure of my brother stood before me, eyes hollow yet filled with an unearthly light. As if sensing my pangs of doubt, he whispered, "You can change this, end the cycle." The moment filled with cold weight, my heart hammering against the darkness that threatened to engulf me. But how? The shadows recoiled, their collective fury boiling to the surface. But before I could finish, they lunged forward, screaming as they coalesced into a mass of obsidian despair, pulling me toward their gaping maw. In a moment of sheer panic, I closed my eyes, focusing on the flickering light once more, letting its warmth guide me even as tendrils of darkness grasped my ankles. I refused to be bound. I shouted, finding strength in my fear, the shadows recoiling at my defiance. With newfound determination, I tore open the space around me, allowing the light to surge forth like a tsunami. Bursting from the grave of despair, I felt the shadows scream, their agony palpable as the walls collapsed around me, towering debris jettisoning into the void. And as I broke through the silence, spiraling away from my tormentors, I glimpsed one last shadow morph into a face, a hint of my own, twisted in mockery, whispering words, "You cannot run from what you have awakened." Just before the light consumed me entirely, dissolving the veil of darkness, a chilling truth unfurled in the crevices of my swirling consciousness. Though I had escaped, my past never truly left me. The lingering horror of their despair would wait for my return, as they whispered in the shadows, "You are never truly free, we shall live on through you." As the light faded, an echo of laughter filled my mind, reminding me, chillingly, that when I finally opened my eyes again, all it did was shift the darkness to another hidden corner of my soul.